He moved with a practiced slowness, the kind of casual authority that let people know who was in charge before he even spoke. He tapped twice on the glass, sharp and loud. The window slid down a few inches, revealing a black woman in a business blazer. She met his gaze with a look of solid, unwavering calm that grated on him instantly. No fear, he noted. She's been through this before. Evening, Walt said, skipping the pleasantries. Let's see your license and registration. Her voice when she spoke was as crisp and professional as her clothes. Good evening, officer. Is there a problem? There is now, Walt muttered under his breath. Aloud he said, the license and registration, now. Her movements were slow, deliberate. She wasn't fumbling or nervous. She was making it clear she wasn't a threat, but to Walt, it looked like defiance. He glanced at the sterile interior of her car. No clutter, no trash, too clean. It was the kind of car someone keeps when they don't want to leave any evidence behind. She handed him an Arizona license. Catherine Price. Arizona? That's a long way from Iowa, he said, his voice dripping with suspicion. What's your business in this parking lot, Ms. Price? I'm a researcher on a temporary assignment, she said, her tone still perfectly level. Air searcher, Walt repeated, drawing the word out as if it were a lie. Right. And I suppose your search requires you to sit in a parking lot where you don't live. I needed a quiet place with a good signal to think, she replied. That was it. Walt had heard enough. This whole situation felt off. Her calm, her perfect answers, the clean car. It was all a performance. His gut told him she was hiding something, and his ego told him she thought she could outsmart him. I'm going to need you to step out of the car, ma'am. She looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Not fear, but disappointment. She unbuckled her belt. Of course, she stood by the SUV, composed and still, as Walt reached for his radio to call for backup. He wasn't going to be stupid. This woman was too cool, too collected. People like that were often the most dangerous. As he waited, he watched her. She didn't fidget. She just stood there, watching him back, as if she were the one in control. That's when a second cruiser pulled into the lot. His partner, Gene Kowalski, was here. The real pressure was about to begin. As Walt approached her again, he felt a surge of satisfaction. The calm facade was about to crack. Gene Kowalski got out of his cruiser and walked over, not with any urgency, but with a lazy swagger. He circled Catherine slowly, looking her up and down, a smirk playing on his lips as if he were inspecting a piece of faulty equipment. He finally landed his gaze on Walt. So, he began, popping his gum loudly. What's the big emergency? Walt handed him the Arizona license. Says she's on assignment. Catherine Price. Not local. Gene took the ID, barely glancing at it. Price, huh? He looked back at her. Tell you what, I'll just call you Catherine. Easier to remember. He tossed the license back to Walt. So Catherine, what's a researcher doing in a 5-year-old Explorer? Government must be paying better than it used to. The insult, slick and casual, hung in the air. Catherine's expression didn't change. Is there a problem with my vehicle, officer? She asked, her voice dangerously neutral. We'll be the judge of that, Gene snapped back, his friendly act vanishing. He leaned in close to Walt. She's got an answer for everything. I don't like it. You run her? Just did, Walt said, his own frustration growing. He pulled up the screen on his patrol tablet, staring at the words in disbelief. No flags, no priors, no warrants. He lowered the tablet. How, he thought, a woman like this, in a car this clean, in this neighborhood, there's always something. She's clean, he said through gritted teeth. Clean? He scoffed. Nobody's clean. He turned back to Catherine, his voice dripping with mock authority. All right, ma'am, let's try this again. What kind of research are you doing here? And don't give me that logistical patterns garbage again. I've given you my statement, officer, she said calmly. No, what you've given us is a story, Walt interjected, stepping forward. And it's not a very good one. So I'm going to search your vehicle. On what grounds? She asked, her gaze locking onto his. Walt felt a surge of adrenaline. This was the moment. On the grounds that you're in a private lot where you don't belong, you have no credible reason for being here, and you fit the profile of individuals we've had issues with in this area. He bluffed, inventing the last part on the spot. That's all the grounds I need. She looked from him to Gene. a flicker of profound weariness in her eyes. It was a look that said she'd seen this exact scene play out 100 times before. She gave a single sharp nod. The back is unlocked. Jean swung open the rear hatch with a flourish and began rifling through her things. He unzipped the empty laptop bag and tossed it onto the pavement. He picked up the bag of almonds, shook it, and then accidentally dropped it, spilling them across the trunk floor. "Oop," he said, not bothering to pick them up. Walt ignored him, his eyes scanning the interior. And then he saw it, a small Velcro square on the side panel. "Aha, what's this?" he said, pointing. "Looks like a mounting point for a GPS tracker." "Who are you spying on, Catherine?" Her head snapped toward him, her eyes turning to steel. "Officer," she said, her voice low and sharp, "I suggest you stop. Right now." The warning was so direct, so full of command, that it almost worked. But Walt's pride was too far gone. "I don't think so," he sneered. "I think you're all out of answers. Turn around, hands on the hood." For a long second, she just stared at him. Then with a slow, deliberate grace that was almost insulting, she turned and placed her hands on the car. Jean moved in behind her to begin the pat-down. Just as his hands were about to touch her blazer, she spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the air like a razor. "Left, inside, pocket." Jean froze. She didn't turn her head. "I said, left inside pocket. And I suggest you do it very, very carefully." Jean looked at Walt, his smug confidence suddenly gone, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. Walt gave him a sharp nod. "Get on with it." He reached into her blazer like he was reaching into a snake pit. He pulled out a leather wallet. He flipped it open. The gold eagle of the Department of Justice seemed to catch fire in the setting sun. Below it, 3 letters, FBI. "Oh no," Jean whispered, taking a full step back as if the wallet had burned him. Walt grabbed it, his heart hammering against his ribs. The badge was heavy, real. He read the credentials, his blood turning to ice. Special Agent Catherine Price, Organized Crime Division. She turned around, her face an unreadable mask of cold professionalism. Her eyes bored into Walt's. "You and your partner," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of a death sentence, "have just compromised a 6-month federal investigation into an international arms trafficking ring." "He's not alone," Agent Price repeated, but her voice had changed. The cold, clinical tone was gone, replaced by a low, furious growl. She turned her full attention to Walt and Jean, and for the first time, they saw the warrior beneath the blazer. "Listen to me very carefully," she said, stabbing a finger first at Walt, then at Jean. "Because of your little power trip, a 6-month investigation into an international arms dealer is currently blowing up in my face. You didn't just compromise my cover, you may have just gotten federal agents killed." She took a step closer, her eyes burning with intensity. "Your careers? They are the absolute least of my concerns. But I promise you, when this is over, I will personally escort you to the unemployment line. Now get back to your vehicle and do not move. Do you understand me?" They both nodded, speechless. Agent Price spun around and moved to the back of her Explorer. She popped a hidden latch on the floor, revealing a false compartment. Inside was a compact plate carrier, magazines for her pistol, a radio earpiece, and a small tactical drone. The 2 cops watched in stunned silence as the researcher began methodically gearing up for combat. She snapped the earpiece in and tapped it. "Olympus, this is Valkyrie. Do you copy?" A voice, calm and distorted, crackled in the quiet lot, audible even from where the cops stood frozen. "Solid copy, Valkyrie. We have eyes on you, and we have eyes on 3B. The package is mobile." "Understood," Price said, slamming a fresh magazine into her pistol and chambering around. The sound was deafening in the silence. "Is the secondary asset in play?" "Affirmative. Asset is moving to intercept, but you are the tip of the spear. We go on your signal. How do you want to play this?" As Price was about to respond, a dark sedan with tinted windows pulled out from behind the apartment building. It didn't turn on its headlights. "There's my signal," Price whispered, her eyes locked on the vehicle. She tapped her earpiece again. "Olympus, target is in a gray Honda Accord. No lights, heading for the south exit. I'm moving to engage. Tell the asset to hold unless I'm compromised. Go time is now." She drew her pistol, holding it low and ready. She gave the 2 local cops one last withering glance. "Stay here, don't talk. Don't even breathe loud. My Overwatch team has you in their sights. If you move, they will consider you part of the problem." And with that, Special Agent Catherine Price melted into the shadows, a ghost moving with deadly purpose toward the slow-rolling sedan. Walt and Jean were left alone in the parking lot, the weight of their catastrophic mistake pressing down on them, their world shrinking to the terrifying realization that they were nothing more than two fools who had just kicked a hornet's nest. "Officers," the man said, his voice quiet but carrying immense authority, "I'm Special Agent in Charge Harrison. Your shift is over. You're with me now." He gestured with his head toward the open rear door of the Suburban. It wasn't a request. Walt and Jean exchanged a single panicked glance before walking, stiff-legged, toward the vehicle. They moved past the silent, professional agents who were now cataloging evidence, none of whom gave them a second look. They were ghosts already. They climbed into the back of the truck, and a junior agent closed the heavy door behind them, sealing them in. The inside of the black Suburban was silent and cold. Walt and Jean sat in the back, surrounded by the smell of clean leather and the palpable aura of authority. Up front, Harrison stared straight ahead, not acknowledging their presence. The vehicle pulled away from the scene, but it didn't turn toward the local precinct. It headed for the interstate. After several long, agonizing minutes of silence, Harrison finally spoke, his voice calm and quiet, which made it all the more terrifying. "I read your jackets on the way over here," he began, his eyes still fixed on the road ahead. "On paper, you are adequate, if unremarkable, police officers. But paper doesn't show the rot. It doesn't show the arrogance. It doesn't show the cheap thrill you get from harassing someone you think is beneath you." He finally turned his head slightly, his cold eyes finding them in the rearview mirror. "Tonight, you didn't just stumble upon a federal agent. You, with your $10 badges and your lazy prejudices, walked into the final phase of Operation Downfall, a 2-year multi-agency investigation. The man you saw taken into custody is the logistical linchpin for 3 different cartels. Agent Price has spent 6 months of her life at immense risk to get close to him, a risk you amplified by a factor of 1,000 because you got your feelings hurt when a black woman in a nice car didn't tremble when you spoke to her. The car pulled into a sterile underground garage and parked. Harrison led them into a small windowless room with nothing but a steel table and 3 chairs. He placed a thin folder on the table. "So, here is what is going to happen," Harrison said, sitting down opposite them. "Option A, I can charge you both with felony obstruction of justice. Your faces will be on every news channel by morning. You will lose your pensions, and you will almost certainly serve time in a federal prison. Your lives as you know them will be over." He let that sink in. "Or," he continued, sliding 2 documents out of the folder, "there is option B. These are your unconditional resignations from the police force, effective immediately. You will sign them, and you will walk out of that door with nothing. Your involvement will be classified. You will never wear a badge again. You will simply cease to be cops." He pushed the papers and 2 pens across the table. "The choice is yours. You have 60 seconds. Jean, his face slick with sweat, snatched the pen and scribbled his name, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold it. Walt stared at the paper. All the years on the job, all the times he thought his gut was right, it all led to this, a quiet, humiliating end in a concrete bunker. He picked up the pen and signed his name. His life's work gone with a flick of the wrist. "A wise decision," Harrison said without emotion. He took the papers and knocked on the door. A silent agent opened it. "Show these men the exit." They were escorted down a hallway and pushed out a heavy steel door into a dark alley they didn't recognize. The door slammed shut behind them. Their careers, their authority, their identity, all gone. As they stood there in the alley, stripped of everything, a black Ford Explorer drove past on the street at the end of the alley. Agent Catherine Price was at the wheel, on the phone, her face illuminated by the screen's glow, already working on the next phase of her now successful operation. She didn't even glance their way. They were already forgotten.